All right, it's Friday. Friday's always the best day of the week for a lot of reasons for a lot of people, but certainly here on the Morning Pit because this is the day of the Morning Pitt Mailbag. It's where we take questions from you that you've been posting on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com all week long, or at least dating back to Tuesday or Wednesday whenever I put up the post asking for questions. But you've been posting questions all week long, and we get to answer as many of them as we can right here on the Morning Pit Mailbag. I always look forward to it, like I say, because, some days are easier than others in terms of coming up with topics. Obviously, yesterday we were going to talk about the Pitt, North Carolina game. Obviously, Wednesday we were going to talk about the schedule release, and Tuesday we were going to talk about getting an offensive line transfer or whatever we talked about on. Tuesday we previewed the North Carolina game. Monday we talked about getting an offensive line transfer in the win over Syracuse. Some days it's easier than others to come up with topics. Some days we have to just sort of dig deep and find something to talk about. But the best thing about the mailbag day, about Friday, is that you give me the topics, you ask the questions, and we answer as many as we can. So I always look forward to this. I appreciate everybody who contributes to questions, and hopefully you look forward to it as well. Let's not waste any more time because we've got some great questions this week. I just scanned through the thread, and I was like, wow. I don't even know the answers to some of these questions. Not like I haven't researched it or something like that, but I just don't. I don't know if I'm going to be able to come up with a definitive answer to a few. There's a couple questions in here that I'm like, wow, that's a tricky question. I don't know. There's one in particular I'm thinking of right now that I still don't know what my answer is going to be. Because it's a great question. And I actually might put the question out to the people on the message boards because I don't know what their answer is going to be either. So let's get into it. Just stop wasting time here. It's the Morning Pitt Mailbag on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, the Morning Pitt Mailbag every Friday here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. These daily Morning Pitt videos, our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30, press conferences, interviews, all those different things. We have it all at YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and that's the place you want to go if you want to get all the Pitt video content. If you want to get all the Pitt content, the place to go is Panther-Lair.com. You see it right there, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com for all the Pitt sports news you can possibly handle. Football, basketball, recruiting, transfers, everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. It's at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, and the message boards where I think we have the best online community of Pitt fans that you are going to find. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. All right, let's start up. We actually had a couple questions that came in a little bit late last week. Missed, we taped the mailbag episode last week before these questions came in, but there are a couple good ones here, so we'll do it. Chief Justice Marshall asks, Chris, this question is addressed to you. Okay, yeah, all the questions are addressed to me. I'm the one who's answering them. But it may also relate to the pulse of the fan base surrounding this program. Have subscriptions increased or decreased over the past year or stayed relatively the same? Did it get a boost from the ACC championship? Is interest higher or lower than, say, the Walt Wanny era if you go back that far? I do go back that far. I started at Panther-Lair.com late 2004. The first football season I covered for this site was the 2005 season, Dave Wanstead's first year. So I do go back that far. I actually covered the 2004 season, or at least I sat in the press box as a representative of the Pittsburgh Sports Report. If you remember that newspaper that came out, it was a great publication. Some great people wrote for it. It was an honor and a pleasure to write for them and do some work for them. So that was the 2004 season. But then 2005 was the first season that I covered for this website. I think I was actually the first internet site that really got a press credential to Pitt football games. It was kind of a big deal at the time. It doesn't seem like it now. It's hard to even imagine 20 years later that was the case, but it was back then. Nobody else had really gotten credit. There weren't that many of these sites around. Most of them were blogs, but we got taken seriously at Panther-Lair.com and got a credential. So I do go back to that point. I can say that in terms of overall subscription numbers, we have more now than we had back then. But, I think with any of these kinds of sites, and it's subscription sites, so talking about the actual subscription numbers, people who are paying to read the website, or just, if it's a free site, the traffic numbers, a lot of it is going to depend on team success. Not all of it. You're still going to have that core base of fans that will always, check in every day or on the message boards constantly and always want to, read and talk about Pitt sports. They're the ones who are always going to go to the games no matter what the team is doing. But to really boost those numbers, I mean, you need something sort of remarkable. There were a couple of years there where we had the highest, percentage-wise, the highest subscription growth in the Rivals network. And it was 2010, 2011, 2012 when Pitt was going through all those coaching changes. We added a lot of subscribers because there was a lot to cover and a lot to talk about. When the team is successful, then yeah, you see the numbers jump, and when the team struggles, the numbers go down. I mean, look, like in terms of interest in the program, and this isn't entirely reflected by our subscription numbers because, just talking about Pitt football specifically here, not really talking about our subscription numbers because, again, we do have a certain extreme fan who frequents our site. These are the fanatics, the ones who, the really diehard Pitt fans who are willing to pay, to read about it every day. But I think, the best way to say this, as you went through, like there were some years there that put a real beating on the interest in Pitt football from that level beyond the diehards or the fanatics. They went 6-7, 3 years in a row, 4 years in a row, or 7 and 6, one of those years, right? 2011 they were 6-7, 2012 they were 6-7, 2013 they were 7-6, 2014 they were 6-7. That takes a little bit out of the fan base. That takes some of the energy out of it. And there've certainly been highs and peaks throughout the Pat Narduzzi era, but there's been some lows as well. Did the ACC championship? Did we get a boost subscription-wise from the ACC championship season? Yeah, we did. Did we get a boost this past fall when they went 7-0? Yeah, we did. Some of that, you have to do a well-timed promo to try and sell subscriptions when, strike when the iron's hot and all of that. But we were able to do that. When the team struggles, then that goes down. And I think that's us, a subscription website, but it's probably, I would say, Pitt's donations follow a similar sort of pattern. They raised a lot of money in the mid-2000s with how good the basketball program was playing. There's that whole Peterson Sports Complex, where the baseball and softball and soccer play. And it's been said to me, like, the money for that was largely raised on the back of the success of Pitt basketball. In all those years when they were really good, people were more willing to give their donations and spend money when the team is good. And so we follow that same sort of thing. I think we're sort of steady, maybe a little bit, maybe even a little more steady than Pitt's donations are, because people still want to read about Pitt and talk about Pitt all the time, even if they don't necessarily want to donate to Pitt because they don't like the way things are going. So that's sort of my take on it. So we're above where we were in the Walt Wanny era, but it's always a little bit up and a little bit down depending on sort of what's going on. Val Pitt also asked last week, do you expect Pitt to get any more transfers either prior to the spring or after the spring? If so, what positions do you think the football staff will target? Well, you asked that question last Thursday, actually, and by the end of the weekend, they had a new transfer. That was Jeff Percy, the offensive tackle from Michigan. Right now, we're all sort of following the story of Rocco Spindler, the offensive guard from Notre Dame, who visited Pitt yesterday. Obviously, we were recording this one yesterday. We recorded this Thursday night, and so maybe something happens between now and the time you watch this video. I'm guessing it won't, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. But obviously, that's something they're keeping an eye on. So you can see another transfer addition along the offensive line. And I think post-spring, it depends on maybe what you lose. But if you could get another backup quarterback, or you could get, a running back wouldn't be bad. A defensive end would be nice, although I think you're probably going to end up overpaying for someone who may or may not actually be worth that money. So, I could see them trying to make some additions, but I think these last two offensive line additions can really go a long way in boosting Pitt for next season because they needed to address the offensive line. And, they've already done it with three guys, with the three additions. And it would be, if they could get that fourth one, that would be real interesting. All right, questions from this week. Smedges jumps in first, as is often the case, and we appreciate it. Pitt's athletic directors have inspired strong emotions from fans throughout history. Who are the top two Pitt ADs since Kaz Myslinski retired in 1982, and what are their greatest hits which earned your vote? So I don't go back to 1982. Like my awareness of Pitt sports, my close following of Pitt sports doesn't go back to 1982. I was 3 years old in 1982. So I feel like I'm probably young compared to some and old compared to others. But I don't have a lot of awareness. And quite frankly, through the 1990s, I mean, I was living in Eastern Pennsylvania. I came out to Pitt. I went to Pitt starting in 1997. And so that's really where my sort of acute awareness of Pitt athletics and the state of things starts. So, you're really looking at about the last 27 years, the last 30 years or so of Pitt athletics. And so I have to kind of confine it to that, right? And so you're talking about Steve Peterson, you're talking about Jeff Long, you're talking about Steve Peterson, you're talking about Scott Barnes, you're talking about Heather Lyke, and you're talking about Alan Green. So it's a smaller sample size. I'll tell you what, honestly, in terms of the impact over the last 27 years, the last 30 years, positive impact, like Steve Peterson 1 is right there at the top or near the top. I know Pitt fans hate him. I know they hate that he tore down Pitt Stadium. I know they hate that he changed the uniforms, but he also resurrected the football program by hiring Walt Harris and absolutely set the basketball program on a trajectory to be a national power by hiring Ben Howland. And I've said this to people, and I get the caveats. Well, he didn't, it was Sonny Vaccaro, they got Ben Howland, or it was this or those. It doesn't matter. He was the athletic director, and he hired those guys. So it happened on his watch. He gets credit for it. Just like you get blamed for the things that happen on your watch, those hires happened on his watch. He hired Walt Harris. He hired Ben Howland, and that makes him responsible. He gets credit for the success that those guys had. And no, did he make a lot of great decisions? Were all his decisions great? No. Was the Steve Peterson 2 era a positive one for Pitt? Not necessarily. I think he has a very sort of troubled history at Pitt. It's a very conflicting history at Pitt. But those 2 hires alone are enough to put you among the most successful athletic directors in Pitt history. So you got to go with him. And he hired Dan Fisher. So, that's pretty good. That was probably the crowning achievement of Steve Peterson 2 was hiring Dan Fisher. SV Pig 1 says, if you could travel to any away game this year from these 3, which would you pick? Stanford, Florida State, or Georgia Tech? Look, if you're talking about somebody who's going to pay for me to travel, pay for the flight, pay for the lodging and all of that, like Stanford in a heartbeat. Absolutely. Without even thinking about it. And I'll take the earliest flight I can get out of town on Friday morning to get out there. Absolutely. I've been to Georgia Tech. I love Atlanta. It's a great city. It's a fun place to watch a game. Although if it's an afternoon game, the sun really shines right in your eyes. But nevertheless, it's an open press box, kind of cool. You don't really have many of those outdoors in the ACC. I think Virginia has one, at least of the places I've been to, and Georgia Tech has one. Outdoors, at least. I got to be honest. I don't have a lot of interest in going to Tallahassee. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of times that I sit back and I'm like, boy, I would really like to spend some time in Tallahassee, Florida. Florida State, obviously, one of the great brands in college football. I'm sure it's a great game day experience, but send me out to the West Coast, send me to the Bay Area, send me to Palo Alto. I will spend my time walking around Stanford's campus. I was actually on Stanford's campus for this summer school program almost 30 years ago, and it was awesome. I mean, I was a stupid 15-year-old, 16-year-old, however old I was at the time, and it was even I could realize this is amazing. This place is absolutely beautiful. And so I would love to go back there. There's no hesitation there. Now, it's obviously out of those 3, Stanford, Florida State, and Georgia Tech, that's the most expensive trip that you're going to take. But I think it also probably would be the most worth it. Val Pitt asks, the Pitt basketball depth looked promising earlier in the year as the recent Jeff Capel is mostly kept to playing only 6. Brandon Cummings had a 30-point game and did well against Cal. Papa Amadou Conti helped them beat Ohio State. Jorge Diaz-Graham has looked like their best 3-point shooter, and even Amsal Delilich showed some promise. Lowe and Leggett are clearly key factors in each game, but how does a short bench impact the team, positive and negative, the rest of the season? That's a great question. I don't have an answer for that. All I know is that Jeff Capel has done this every year, right? I mean, he has shortened the bench every year. And I feel like every year we sit in November and December and say, boy, this is going to be the year where they actually stick with a deep bench, where they play 8 or 9 guys. This is when they're actually going to do it. And then they never do it. Like, I mean, we said it this year. We're like, this might really be the year where they legitimately go 7, 8, 9 deep. And here we are coming up on the end of January, and they're playing like 6 guys. It's just, I don't know if he tightens up. I don't know if he feels like they have a very slim margin for error, so they have to stick with their best players. I'm with you. I think Brandon Cummings can give you something. I think Papa Amadou Conti can give you something. I think Amsal Delilich can give you something. I think Jorge Diaz-Graham can give you something. But I think there's probably an excuse with each of those guys. Well, Brandon Cummings is, his defense isn't there. Jorge's not that great defensively. Amsal, probably the same thing. Probably the defense and a little bit of the ball handling. I don't know why Papa Amadou Conti doesn't play, but there's a lot about the center position I don't understand. I don't have a good explanation other than Capel tightens up in a lot of ways. Tightens up the rotation and maybe tightens up with his, just being tight during games and being afraid of what could happen if he takes one of these guys off the court for an extended period of time. If he takes Damian Dunn out, if he takes Ishmael Leggett out, if he takes Jalen Lowe out. And so every year we think it's not going to happen, and every year it does. Iron 99 asks, do you think Amsal's injury hurt him in terms of blending in with the team early and possibly carving out a role? Do you think there'll be mutual interest in his return next season? I don't know about the second part. I'm not even going to speculate on it. I'd like to think he's not going to transfer. You see the pictures, you watch the videos, you watch the games, he's engaged and all that stuff. I don't know. So I'm not going to speculate on that. In terms of the injury, it certainly didn't help. But, when you talk to those guys, when you talk to the players, you talk to the coaches, they all raved about how good he looked in practice. So, I think they had a good sense of what he could do, and they had a good sense of how to play with him. They just, once he actually got on the court, it didn't seem like he fit in. It just didn't seem like a fit, but, either by his choosing or his teammates choosing. It just didn't seem to work. So, I don't know. It's, I don't know. I don't have a good answer to either one of those questions, to be honest. I just don't. I wish I did. Left Coast Panther says, what grade do you give the receiving core heading into 2025? If the linemen should be up to par with the conditioning, since Cade Bell says it takes a year, are the wideouts in their hands the biggest concern on offense? I think the wide receivers just right now, as we sit here on January 31st, they just don't. Nothing really stands out. I think Kenny Johnson can be really good. He needs to get like twice as many targets as he got last year. Like he needs to be peppered with targets, which is what I thought they were going to do in 2024. You remember back in the spring game, he got like 14 targets or something like that. And I was like, this is what the offense is going to look like. They are going to feed the ball to Kenny Johnson nonstop. And they really didn't. This year, they should. 2025, it should be all about Kenny Johnson. And I think he's going to be really good. I think he is a really good player. The rest seem fine. The rest I think are guys who, if they can get open, they'll have an opportunity to make plays. You know what I mean? Like if the offense works, the O-line holds up, and Eli Holstein takes steps forward, then the receivers will be good enough to execute the offense. I don't know if I see a real game breaker in the group. And I didn't really see a real game breaker in the group last year. I think Kanate Munfield's really good. I think he's really good at what he does, and he made some huge plays for Pitt last year. But I don't know if I would put him in that category, that wide receiver one, that game breaker category. And I sort of feel that way about the group this year, outside of maybe Kenny Johnson. So I think they're fine, but I think that I think they can be productive and successful with a good, if the blocking holds up and the quarterback executes the offense. What was next here? The special sauce says, what's your current prediction for Pitt football's too deep? I probably have one, but we're also almost 20 minutes into this video. I'm not going to sit here and go through all 22 positions on offense and defense right now. I have some thoughts. We could talk about that another time. Look, it's also, like I said, January 31st. So we have lots of time to break down the two deep. I think Eli Holstein will be the starting quarterback, and Desmond Reed will be the starting running back, and Kyle Lewis and Rasheem Biles will be the starting linebackers. I'll give you that. How's that? Sean Fitzsimmons will probably start a defensive tackle. We'll circle back on that one. Maybe pick a couple position groups each week in the mailbag. Be like, okay, this week, what's your prediction on 2 deep for quarterback, running back, and tight end or something? And, next, the week after that, what's your prediction for 2 deep on the offensive line? We'll just go piecemeal like that. And then we can, spread this out rather than taking up one whole mailbag just with that question. I like this question. Rock Hen asks, Chris, who does Pitt miss more this year? Federico or Will Jeffress? That's wild. Like that's such an interesting question to me because I think there's a lot of layers to it. Like I think there's a lot to dig into with that question. I think a lot of people on the message boards, we jump right on Federico, but a lot of people on the message boards don't like Cam Corrin. I kind of think Will Jeffress would be a valuable player on this team. I think his defense would really help. I think having Will Jeffress and having a desire for his defense to be on the court might force the coaches to use Guillermo Diaz-Graham at the 5 a little bit more, get more of a timeshare there between Diaz-Graham and Cam Corrin at the center position because you would have Jeffress as your 4. I just think you could get some really strong defensive lineups. And I think the defense on this team can improve. I think they did. They had a pretty good second half against North Carolina, really good second half, 31% shooting, 21 total points allowed. And so, that was good. They need to keep building on that. But I think having another really stout defensive player, particularly going to Wake Forest where they're going to face Efton Reed, we know what Will Jeffress did against Efton Reed last year, so he'd be really helpful this week or this weekend. But I might lean toward him a little bit. I know people feel like they're missing that rim protection from Federico that he offered at the center position, but I still feel like Cam Corrin gives you enough offensively that it's okay. I think defensively the add for me would be Will Jeffress. All right, this is the last question we're going to take because I think this is a wild question, and I hadn't really thought about these terms at all, and I want to know what you think because I don't know an answer to this. Zenmeister1992 says, this might be a weird one, but if someone told you in 2021, after the Western Michigan loss, that Pitt football would then win the ACC and Kenny Pickett would be a Heisman Trophy finalist, and then someone told you that after Pitt football started 7-0 in 2024, that they wouldn't win a game the rest of the season, including a bowl game against Toledo, which one would you think you would find more believable if you didn't have the info we had now? So, I love this question. What's more unbelievable? Going from losing to Western Michigan to winning the ACC and Kenny Pickett being a Heisman Trophy finalist in the most successful Pitt football season in 40 years, or starting 7-0 and then losing out, including a bowl game against Toledo? I don't know. I would have to say, so in both cases, right? After the Western Michigan game, if you came up to me and said, do you believe Pitt will win the ACC this year? You know what? The more that I think about it and the more that I think back to what I was thinking at that time, I was down on it after that Western Michigan game for sure. But I still felt remember, they had already beaten Tennessee that year, right? So, you saw some promising signs. You saw that the team could be pretty good. And the ACC looked like it might be a bit vulnerable. So, I remember thinking, and I remember having a phone call with somebody, not anybody even remotely connected to Pitt, like an observer, and they were like, Pitt's going to win they're going to win the Coastal, and they'll get back to Charlotte. And I was like, wow, you're really confident. And then the more I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, they probably will. I don't know if I believe that Kenny Pickett would become a Heisman Trophy finalist, but if you had told me which one would I bet more money on, turning the Western Michigan loss into an ACC title or turning the 7-0 start into a 7-6 final record, I probably would have bet on the ACC title. Bet more money on that. Because, if after the 7-0 start, after that Syracuse game, if you turned around and you came to me and you said, do you believe Pitt will lose every game from here on out? I would have been like, are you crazy? They're going to win at least 9. They're going to lose at some point, but they're going to win at least 9 games. At least, if not 10 or 11. So I actually think, now as I'm thinking through it, as I'm sort of talking through it and remembering my mindset after the Western Michigan game and after the Syracuse game, I think I probably could have been convinced about winning the ACC in 2021 more than you could have convinced me about losing out. I would say that was the more unbelievable outcome. the more unlikely outcome, the more unlikely result, losing out in this past season. So actually, I thought that was an impossible question. I didn't think I had an answer to it, but the more I thought about it, the more I talked through it, actually, I think that's my answer. What's your answer? Which one's a more unbelievable outcome? Turning the Western Michigan loss in 2021 into an ACC championship, or turning the 7-0 start this past season into a 7-6 final record? Which one surprised you more? Which one still surprises you more that it turned that way? All right, great questions this week. I like that question a lot. And I'd never really thought about the two rather unbelievable outcomes, but I'm going to be thinking about that one. My opinion might change, but I think I'm leaning toward the 7-6 finish. All right. Thanks so much to everybody who submitted questions. There were great questions this week. As always, thanks everybody who watched the video today and watch these videos all week long. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. It's all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Subscribe button is right down there. It's right down there somewhere on that yellow.com. There's a little blue button. Click that thing, subscribe. We would really appreciate it. And then don't forget to check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We appreciate it. Hope you've had a great week. Hope you have a great weekend. Enjoy the Pitt Wake Forest game tomorrow, and we will catch up with you on Monday for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.